UFC 281, Adesanya versus Pereira takes place this weekend, and I'm going to go through the entire card, starting with the early prelims, ending with the main event, giving my prediction and breakdown for every single fight on the card, and what an amazing, stacked card this is, top to bottom. Let's start straight away with the early prelim opener of Carlos Ulberg versus Nicolae Negumereanu. I'm leaning towards Carlos Ulberg here, so I'm going to take him to win this one. Nicolae Negumereanu's good, but I truly believe that almost at no point in his fight against Kennedy Nzechukwu was he actually winning. And I know that Carlos Ulberg genuinely lost to Kennedy Nzechukwu by second round TKO. He was throwing so many big shots. He was completely schooling Nzechukwu and then gassed himself out and got KO'd afterwards with a comeback win for Nzechukwu. However, he was completely schooling Nzechukwu early on in that fight. At no point was Nicolae Negumereanu schooling Nzechukwu. It was a robbery. It was a bad decision. And I know he beat Igor Pereira, but Igor Pereira had a very, very protected record coming into the UFC other than a big win on the Contender Series. So I don't really know how much value I put behind that. They've both beaten some decent opponents in decent fashion. But again, I'm looking at the Alexa Kamur fight and seeing a split decision there for Nicolae Negumereanu. But Carlos Ulberg seems to be a little bit more smooth sailing outside of that one loss to Nzechukwu where he was winning the entire fight before gassing out. He beat Bruno Oliveira 8-1 on the Contender Series, schooled him, schooled Fabio Cherant over 3 rounds, and that was a pretty easy, smooth sailing win, and then destroyed Tafon and Chukwu. He's got a bunch of momentum. He's active. He's looking in solid shape as well on that picture that we saw with him, Dan Hooker, and Israel Adesanya. So I'm going to go with Carlos Ulberg. Maybe Nicolae Negumereanu is going to be able to get some takedowns going. It is a little bit alarming to see that Nicolae Negumereanu has a reach advantage, despite being far shorter. But I think Ulberg uses his reach a lot better than Nicolae does. So I'm going to count on Carlos Ulberg winning this one via like a 29-28 decision. He will be taken down, but he'll work his way back up. CKB guys typically have decent takedown defense, and it's not like Nicolae Negumereanu's ragdolling people. So I'm going to go with Carlos Ulberg to start things off. Moving on, Julio Arce versus Montel Jackson. I'm going with Montel Jackson here. I think he's a very underrated prospect in the bantamweight division. A little bit of a fact about Montel Jackson. He has some of the biggest hands in the UFC. No joke. I think he has like the same hand size as like Brock Lesnar. Dude's got weirdly large hands, especially for the bantamweight division. He beat JP Bays, knocked him down in moments, was able to survive some scrambling moments as well. He beat Jesse Strader. He's beat some low-level guys. However, he's kind of held his own against some really good guys like Brett Johns and Ricky Simone, who are great at grappling. I just don't see Julio Arce being able to out-grapple him. And if this is going to be a striking match, Andre Yule, that's not really a level of opponent I'm looking at. Song Yudong put him away. Hakeem Dawodu got the split decision against him. Shaman Mariah's got a split decision against him. I feel as though Montel Jackson is going to be able to do his work on the feet. It's going to be a close fight, split decision, 29-28, but I'm leaning towards Montel Jackson. I think he has a lot of physical advantages over Julio Arce. He's got a 5.5-inch reach advantage, massive hands, as I said, a lot of power behind him, very quick, and he's the younger guy as well, just coming into his prime. So I'm hoping he's made some improvements during his time off. I'm going with Montel Jackson. Moving on, Mike Trizano versus Seung Choi. Pretty straightforward pick here. I'm going with Seung Choi. Only because Mike Trizano he hasn't really shown an ability to get people to the ground. Seung Choi's got a great set of takedown defense. And Trizano does things very basically. Khalibal throws weird, goofy shots at times. And that's where someone like Khalibal can get the win over a guy like Seung Choi and drop him in some moments. And you look at other fighters like Caceres. He does goofy stuff all over the place, and it was really Seung Choi that messed up that win for himself by throwing an illegal knee and letting Caceres kind of back into that fight, But still, Caceres very goofy, unorthodox. Joshua Khalibal very goofy, unorthodox. But when you put him in there against someone who does things very simple, he seems to be able to do work on them. So I'm going to trust in Seung Choi to win this one against Mike Trizano, who's just going to be a bit of a heavy bag moving forward, in my opinion. So I'll go with 30-27. Seung Choi gets this one done. Moving on. Up the card, Karolina Kowalkiewicz versus Silvana Gomez Juarez. I'm going with Silvana Gomez Juarez. She's got nasty hands. And I don't know what it is. I can just see that granny face of Karolina Kowalkiewicz being very upset about a quick loss in the first round. She's been KO'd before in her career. She's been hurt before in her career multiple times as well. She lost to Jessica Penne, which just isn't a good look. I don't care how you looked against Felice Herrig. Silvana Gomez Juarez, she's just got to the UFC. I know she's a little bit older, but she's new in her career. Of course, 37 years of age, but she's new to her MMA career. You know what I'm saying? She did start very early on, but it took her a very long time to get here. And now it's like the real part of her UFC career is about to begin. And I think she's going to do good. She's got wicked quick hands early on. And I know she lost to Vanessa Demopoulos by submission, but the quick hands before. If she can just learn to not get overexcited after landing those big shots, I think she can actually be something special, and she looked good against Na Liang. So I'm going to go with Silvana Gomez Juarez over Karolina Kowalkiewicz. I think she'll get it done just landing big boxing combos. Karolina closes her eyes sometimes when she's punching, you know what I mean? So I can see her getting caught up in a combination. Like a bit of a Salt Pappy combo, you know what I'm saying? Moving on. Up the card, Ottman Azaitar versus Matt Frevola. It's actually a tougher fight to predict than suggested. You should go with Ottman Azaitar, but the fact that they've made him an underdog has led me to believe that I definitely have to go with Ottman Azaitar here. How can you make this guy an underdog at this point in Matt Frevola's career when I know he's got good grappling and we've seen some signs at least of Ottman Azaitar being out-grappled on the regional scene, but he's never lost to the style. You know what I'm saying? But we see Matt Frevola get put out by Terence McKinney, beaten up for 3 rounds brutally by Armand Sarukian, KO'd by Marco Polo Reyes, who's nothing too special himself, but was a dangerous guy once upon a time. That was a crazy fight. He had a war with Lando Venata. He beat Jarlin Turner by out-grappling him, I understand that, but if Luis Pena can make it close enough to where he arguably could win the fight, and he also went to a war with Gennaro Valdez, looked good, but like he's still open in the pocket. And if you're open in the pocket, Ottman Azaitar's on the sauce. You know what I'm saying? As we know from the hotel incident in Abu Dhabi, he was supposed to be cut from the UFC and now he's back. Long time off. I just don't think Frevola's explosive enough or strong enough to manhandle Azaitar. I reckon I'm going to see Azaitar get like a KO in the second round. It's going to get scrappy. It's going to get messy. And he'll land a big shot in the second, I reckon. Ottman Azaitar gets this one done by TKO as the fight goes on. Moving on. Up the card, Andre Petroski versus Wellington Turman. I went with Andre Petroski here over Wellington Turman. Wellington Turman just isn't special in any way. He's young. He's got time to improve. I understand. But again, a split decision to Sam Alvey. Just don't sit well with me. Hey, that don't sit well with me. Done. You did to me. Done. But Andre Petroski, you know, chokes out Nick Maximov, finishes Yao Zhonghu, Michael Gilmore. Not the best of opponents, I get it, but he's putting on some dominant performances. And here's a big thing as well about this. Finished Eric Anders in a grappling match at Fury Pro Grappling 5. And beat Phil Hawes in a grappling match. Now, Phil Hawes, fair play, his chin's not the best. But his grappling is amazing. So the fact that Andre Petroski is going out there and out-hustling him in a grappling match and winning a decision, I can trust him to out-grapple Wellington Turman. Plus, he's got good submissions and good jiu-jitsu awareness. So I think he has the advantage on the feet. I think he's got the advantage on the ground, in the control. If he settles on the ground for too long in like full guard, it's going to be some danger. But I can just see him working. He does chain takedowns very well and doesn't really set in position. Andre Petroski, he'll like chain takedown, wait for you to get back up, take you down again. So I'm going to go with Andre Petroski getting this one done. Decision win. Moving on. Up the card to another fight, which is Erin Blachfield versus Molly McCann. I'm going with Erin Blachfield. And the reason why I'm going with Erin Blachfield, I was normally always going to go with her, but I do have to respect that Molly McCann can deal damage in that division. You know what I mean? She is one of the, she's playing for the other team, if you know what I'm saying. So normally you do want to bet on those types of fighters rather than the straight Erin Blachfield. But watching Miranda Maverick, who Erin Blachfield out-grappled very constantly and very dominantly, watching Miranda Maverick go on a bit of a tear herself recently and just completely ragdoll even more women in that division, it kind of tells me that wasn't just like Miranda Maverick's nothing. You know what I mean? Miranda Maverick should have beaten Macy Barber, lost to Erin Blachfield, but out-grappled Gillian Robertson, out-grappled Sabina Marzo and finished her, out-grappled Shayna Young in her recent fight as well. Like, she's consistently dominating in the grappling. But Erin Blachfield out-grappled her. It's not like a one-off, like, oh, Blachfield's looked decent against so-and-so and so-and-so. JJ Aldridge is a veteran and has good takedown defense and main sparring partner at times for Valentina Shevchenko and Rose Namajunas. So she's a very underrated fighter herself, and still Erin Blachfield got the win over her. Molly McCann's shown a history of being out-grappled, and I feel like her hands that she's come into love a little bit more. You know, they're not gonna be as vicious when she's got the back of her mind that she doesn't want to get taken down by Blachfield. And I think if we get out that first round, that second round, we're going to see Molly McCann start to lose a bit of sting in those hands. And I reckon we're going to see like a 29-28 Blachfield with maybe a Molly McCann doing decent in the third round to stuff takedowns and push the pace. But there's just not enough power to get a finish. Because let's not forget she took Yeon Kim to a decision. Lost to Lara Fritzen. Lost to Taylor Santos. You know what I mean? Got choked out by Gillian Robertson. I know this is a long time ago and stuff like that, but still. Lara Fritzen. Her name has changed, yeah? Yeah, Procopio. Okay, cool. She changed her name. Whatever. All good. But yeah. Still. I don't like that look. And that was only a year ago against Procopio. So I'm going to go with Erin Blachfield ruining the hype of Molly McCann and getting herself a decision win. But Molly McCann's going to look pretty decent. Moving on. Up the card. Dominick Reyes versus Ryan Spann. I'm going to go with... I'm going to go with Ryan Spann, I think. I'm going to go with Ryan Spann. I think Reyes is going to be a disaster story in MMA. I've just got a really... Like, he arguably should beat Ryan Spann on his best day. But I just know in my heart this won't be his best performance. This ain't the best Dominick Reyes showing up. You know what I mean? He's taken all the damage he's taken in his last few fights. It's hard to bounce back motivation-wise after the John Jones fight because he should have beaten... He beat John Jones. This guy beat John Jones 3-2. Clear as day. Could have been 4-1. They gave it 4-1 Jones on a scorecard. Like, I don't even want to get into that right now. But I'm looking at like the split decision to Volkan Ozdemir, and it seems to me when a guy's got a bit of power for him to worry about, if it gets past that first round moment, he does shell up a little bit more, and we saw that against Blachowicz. We saw it against Prohaska, although Prohaska's wild enough to still keep a guy in a fight because he's given them so many opportunities by charging towards them, if you know what I mean. But Ryan Spann, I think we're going to see a bit of a sting in Reyes consistently with power shots. And I can see him getting like a guillotine finish on Reyes. He's got a nasty guillotine. I think he'll rock Reyes. Reyes will shoot in. And then Ryan Spann will reverse it and guillotine him and tap him out. And I think Reyes is going to be like, well, I just got to stay active and get right back in there. And maybe then he can start picking up some wins. I just worry about him after all this time off. You know what I mean? He last fought in May of 2021. And he took a vicious amount of damage. It's going to be nearly a year and a half since he's been in the cage. And that's the type of fight where you reconsider fighting for a career. And he was just sort of like exploring himself. And I don't like the sound of it. Maybe he comes back like Masvidal, but I don't like this matchup. Ryan Spann looked good in his last fight. He's got momentum. I know he's got a glass chin. Which is really annoying, but he's weirdly good. You know what I mean? In certain bursts, he's really good. And I think those few bursts are going to be enough for him to get the win over Dominick Reyes in the upset. So I'm going with Ryan Spann, funnily enough. Moving on. Up the card to another fight, which is going to be Renato Moicano versus Brad Riddell. I'm going Renato Moicano, man. I think Brad Riddell, a lot of confidence that he had in his striking in his career, came from the fact that he sort of had this feeling in his mind that, you know, I'm not going to get KO'd. I'm the kickboxer. I'm the good kickboxer. I'm not going to get KO'd. And watching him get wheel kick KO'd brutally by Rafael Fiziev, rocked by Drew Dober, you know, hurting moments against other fighters as well. Even against Jamie Mullarkey, he was getting clipped here and there, and that was a way less skilled version of Mullarkey than we see now. And then Jarlin Turner tags him immediately, hurts him, gets him in the sub. I can just see Moicano pressuring him and finding a scramble where he's on the back of Brad Riddell, and I think from there he can do what he wants. I don't like the lack of options for Brad Riddell. He seems to have this thing where if he loses on the feet, he shoots a takedown, but he doesn't really have anything. You know what I'm saying? It's not like he has an offensive grappling game, really. He did okay against Mustafayev in moments, but Mustafayev's not like a jiu-jitsu capitalist of a grappler. And I'm not talking economy-wise, you know what I'm saying? I'm talking like capitalizing on things. He's not a guy like Aljo or Charles Oliveira or Renato Moicano, where they'll get a position and then they'll immediately advance to a position where they can secure complete control and start looking for submissions. Mustafayev's more of a guy who's just going to sort of hold you and get top control and do that type of stuff and still give you room to scramble and then try and take you back down again. And we even saw with Mustafayev when Kevin Lee scrambled with him, he got the back and Kevin Lee choked him out. You know what I mean? So I feel like there's differences there. I'm watching Mustafayev hold him against the cage and also seeing that, Brad Riddell's not getting any younger at this point. I'm going to side with Renato Moicano. Took the fight against RDA on short notice. Looked pretty decent. He's a bit older than Brad Riddell, I understand. But I still feel like he's got some in the tank. Very experienced. This is going to be nothing new to him. I feel like he's got this one. I think he's going to get scrappy. It's going to get messy. Maybe Riddell will hurt him in a moment, but he'll stay in there. And then there's going to be a moment as the fight gets later on where he's going to open up an opportunity to get the back and choke him out. So I'm going to go rear naked choke for Renato Moicano. He's got 3 of them in his last 5 fights. So I'm going to go with him. And he beat the legendary Chase Hooper in a grappling match, let's not forget. So I'm going to go with Renato Moicano rear naked choke. 2nd or 3rd round. Moving on. Up the card, Dan Hooker versus Claudio Puelles. I'm going with Dan Hooker. I believe in Dan Hooker here against Claudio Puelles. I really do. Claudio Puelles is good. He's very good at jiu-jitsu. Extremely good. But his stand-up to me, from what I'm seeing with his stand-up, I'm just not seeing good things. And I don't know if anyone else has been watching any of Claudio Puelles' tape. But, the Groteshmacher fight. If Groteshmacher, who's not a top-caliber fighter, can scramble out and, just through sheer stupidity, lose to you in the 3rd round by engaging on the ground with you, because Groteshmacher was doing a great job against Claudio Puelles. Jordan Levitt took him to a close fight. Very competitive, but he got it done on total strikes and stuff like that. Martin Bravo got the KO on him. I saw him against Marcos Mariano, and it's just like there's certain fights where I'm like, if there is a real capable fighter in there with him on the feet, there's going to be some problems for him. I can see Dan Hooker stuffing the takedowns against Claudio Puelles, and I just don't see Claudio Puelles as the type of guy who's going to have a method to get this to the ground against Dan Hooker, because I know Makhachev took him down, but it's a different style of grappling. The Dagestanis are good at getting you to the ground, whereas the jiu-jitsu guys, they got to try and find a way to get you to the ground that isn't just sheerly double-legging you and taking you down, you know what I mean, or single-legging you and sweeping out your leg. But I feel like Dan Hooker's going to be able to stuff the takedowns, and I reckon he's going to be able to get this one done on the feet. I actually think he's going to find a vintage Dan Hooker KO, so I'm going to go with a Dan Hooker finish at the end of the 1st round. He'll start making reads and he'll land a big shot. I think he's best at lightweight. I think his body will feel good cutting to lightweight after recently cutting to featherweight. It's going to be a nice change of tone for him again, and I reckon he'll get this one done. I believe in him. I believe in Dan Hooker, Good fighters have tried to get him down. Ally Quinter's wizard at jiu-jitsu. He had the legs of Dan Hooker, and Hooker was able to defend and beat Gilbert Burns. Even threatened Gilbert Burns on the ground with a guillotine and stuff like that. So I'm going to go with Dan Hooker getting this one done by TKO in the 1st round. And I think Puelles' stand-up is going to get a little bit exposed. Moving on. Up the card, Frankie Edgar versus Chris Gutierrez. I'm going Frankie Edgar. I'm going with Frankie Edgar. Done a lot of research on Chris Gutierrez recently. There's 2 things that I'm missing in his game. Power and takedown defense. That's what I'm worried about in his game. I've watched Frankie Edgar against very good opponents like Marlon Vera win the fight until the very end. And I know you're going to say, well, he always wins the fight until the very end. And, you've got a guy like Chris Gutierrez. Maybe he could get a wacky moment in the 3rd round and finish him off. But I do trust Frankie Edgar here. And he's an underdog. This card is either going to go really well for me or really bad, because I picked a lot of underdogs here. But I'm siding with Frankie Edgar over Chris Gutierrez. I watched Cody Durden, who I don't think is the same level of wrestler as Frankie Edgar after watching some of his other fights. I watched Cody Durden take down Chris Gutierrez and control him for an entire first round on the ground. You know? I just don't think I can trust in a Chris Gutierrez. Not only that, he doesn't really have the power to, like, destroy Edgar. He mostly relies on leg kicks, but Edgar switches stances and moves around a bunch. Like, he was even awkward for Max Holloway in certain moments in their fight. And I know that people are going to say, you know, maybe his chin's gone now and his motivation's gone, but I think MSG, New York, perfect retirement fight. I don't think he's thinking, I'm just going to go out there and lose. I think he really wants to win this one. And I think the reason why he's even taken on Chris Gutierrez, as opposed to some other big names that he maybe could have gotten, like a, you know, even like an Adrian Yanez coming up, or even some of like the guys that are on a loss in the bantamweight division right now that are bigger names. Maybe he could have got a Rob Font or something, but I think the reason why he took on Chris Gutierrez is because he picked out a perfect opponent style-wise that he knows he can beat, that is a good chance to retire on top. And I think this is a good matchup for Frankie Edgar. I'll do a more in-depth breakdown on that, but I'm going to go with Frankie Edgar, you know? I've just seen some signs in Chris Gutierrez's game that worry me a little bit too much, you know? Dana Batgarel took him down in the first round. And it's the Felipe Colares fight, man. It's the Felipe Colares fight. It was a split decision. Should he have won the fight? Yes, he should have won the fight. But Felipe Colares lost to Chase Hooper in a fight. He lost to Chase Hooper. Dominantly lost to Chase Hooper as well, may I add. And I watched Felipe Colares kind of hang with him a bit on the feet. Even though he was getting outstruck, he hung with him. And he shouldn't be hanging with him. Edgar wins. Moving on. Up the card to another fight, which is going to be Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler. I'm going Dustin Poirier, man. Chandler gets hit too much. He just gets hit too much. And Gaethje kind of is the perfect guy to make him look good against an elite level lightweight. You know? Because Gaethje will get hit and he won't, like, immediately capitalize on things. He'll take his time and wear into a fight. And I know he did good against Oliveira and he caught Oliveira, but Poirier's striking defense. I've been watching a lot of Poirier fights recently. When he knows someone has power to be worried about, he didn't realize that with Michael Johnson at the time because no one knew what Michael Johnson was capable of. Sometimes he loses to bums. Sometimes he beats the best in the world. He's one of those fighters. But when it comes to Michael Chandler, there's a lot of fights that do go to a decision. It's not always a big KO finish. And I think Poirier's the kind of guy that will take this fight to a decision because he's dog tough. And I've made the mistake for a very long time about Dustin Poirier, but I won't make it again. The dude has got a solid chin. He really does have a granite chin. Think about Dustin Poirier and how long he's been doing it. Let me read you the names of his opponents. Charles Oliveira, Conor McGregor, Dan Hooker, Khabib Nurmagomedov, Max Holloway, Eddie Alvarez, Justin Gaethje, Anthony Pettis, Eddie Alvarez again, Jim Miller, Michael Johnson, Bobby Green, Joe Duffy, Yancy Medeiros, Carlos Diego Ferreira, Conor McGregor, and there's even names like Cub Swanson earlier on, the Korean Zombie, Max Holloway again. Like, there's just so many names. And sure, we can say maybe Chandler will shoot a takedown, but it seems like Chandler only shoots takedowns when he has to. And when someone does that, it kind of tells me you don't want to shoot takedowns because you're worried you're going to gas out wrestling. And Chandler is a very heavy guy, you know, a very muscle-bound guy. So that doesn't surprise me that maybe he would be a guy that if he had to work an offensive wrestling game, maybe he would gas out a little bit. I just think Poirier is going to be able to sort of trade with him in the pocket and finish him off. I think I see a Poirier first-round TKO. I do. I don't see him letting Chandler off the hook if he hurts him on the feet. And I just see Tony Ferguson hurt Chandler on the feet in the first round. And Chandler really didn't have much for Ferguson on the feet in the first. Got dropped, got hurt, got stung with some more big shots, and then he decided to shoot a takedown at the end and try and win the round back for himself. And then landed that front kick, whatever, in the second round. All good. It still hurts me to this day, but I'm going to side with Poirier over Michael Chandler. I just think he's really underrated early on in the boxing exchanges. And McGregor's got heavy power, and he neutralized it, and McGregor's been boxing a lot. Maybe Chandler could chew up the leg, Who knows? But Poirier's got a bit of reach to work with, 1.5 inches. And I think he's going to make it count. I think Poirier gets in a scrap with Chandler. I just don't see him getting put out cold. And if he doesn't get put out cold, I see it being a scrap. And if it's a scrap, my money's on Poirier very often if a guy don't have the jiu-jitsu of Charles Oliveira to try and make something happen. So I'm going to go with Dustin Poirier winning this one. TKO at the end of round 1 in a great first round of action where both guys get hit by big shots. Moving on. Up the card, Carla Esparza versus Zhang Weili. Now, I actually think Carla Esparza is very underrated. I'm not going to pick her, of course, because I'm not mentally insane. You kind of have to go Zhang Weili here. Based on what we've seen, like, in all honesty, Carla Esparza isn't the champion yet. Because there wasn't a fight that took place with her and Namajunas in their rematch. There simply wasn't a fight. So how did she get a belt if the fight didn't happen? The fight is still yet to happen. As far as I'm concerned, Esparza versus Namajunas 2 is still delayed for a later date. Okay? And we're going to be trying to reschedule that one at some point. Carla Esparza versus Zhang Weili. Carla Esparza is underrated. But Zhang Weili's grappling game since training with Henry Cejudo has shown massive improvements. And watching her pick up Ngannou and just looking at the strength that she showed in Joanna first round of their rematch, she went from, and I know this might be partially due to the fact that, you know, Joanna hasn't really been taking her career as seriously, but Joanna stuffed everything by Esparza, as far as I remember. I'm just going to double check that right now. But I remember a Joanna Jędrzejczyk destroying Carla Esparza. And I'm going to check if that is true, that she stuffed all the takedowns. She definitely stuffed the vast majority of them, as far as I'm aware. Let me find out. So she lost to Joanna Jędrzejczyk, and Joanna Jędrzejczyk gave up 1 takedown for a little moment and stuffed 16 of Carla Esparza's in 2 rounds and just beat up Carla Esparza badly in round 2 and finishes her off. I know Joanna Jędrzejczyk took a little bit of time to herself in between her fights with Zhang Weili because of the injuries that she sustained. But Zhang Weili went from a girl who couldn't take down Joanna Jędrzejczyk in their first fight and keep her there to basically ragdolling her on the ground in the first round of their rematch. She also went a bit heavy on the grappling with Namajunas, who we've seen can easily out-scramble the takedowns of Carla Esparza in their rematch in the few moments that they did scramble with each other. But Zhang Weili was also going with Rose Namajunas, and they had a much more compelling grappling match with each other. I just think that early on in this fight, Esparza's way too hittable and way too timid and terrible at fighting, which is crazy to say because she's a champion in probably the most skilled women's division in the world. Zhang Weili's vicious on the feet. She went toe-to-toe with Andrade and won. I can't ignore that. Tisha Torres is a phenomenal grappler as well, and Zhang Weili beat her, and that was way earlier in her career as well. And she actually showed some ability off of her back as well in that fight. And she submitted Jessica Aguilar with a submission early on in her UFC career. She's got a few submissions as well earlier on. I think her game has developed enough, and working with Cejudo, perfect person to work for and work under for this fight camp. I've got Zhang Weili winning this one by first round TKO. Stuffing all the takedowns, but not only stuffing them, keeping Esparza in a tight clinch after she stuffs them, landing knees to the body, landing elbows, and just beating up Esparza in the first round, I think. I can't deny the grappling improvement. If this was a Zhang that never showed that improvement, the line would be a way closer thing in the odds, and maybe you could go with Esparza, but I don't think you can now. So I'm going to go Zhang Weili first round TKO. Moving on. Up the card, Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira. I'm going with Alex Pereira. Again, a card where I could be so right or so wrong, but I'm gonna hedge my bets on Alex Pereira. You know, a lot of people say, "Oh, why are you picking I can't pick against Usman or Adesanya." I notice until I pick Leon Edwards to win, then all of a sudden it's okay. I see the dominant champions in Adesanya and Usman, okay, and you see these dominant champions. You got to pick the right contenders. You know what I mean? I picked Adesanya to win the Whittaker rematch. He didn't. He lost. And we'll talk about that in a second. You got to pick the right contender at the right time. And Alex Pereira is that contender at this point. I don't see Adesanya grappling with him. We've seen before so many times in the UFC when people that don't grapple offensively all of a sudden try to grapple offensively against people. They gas. And I think Adesanya's team is aware of that. And Coach Eugene is going to see that and think, yeah, that's probably not the smartest thing to do. Plus, Alex Pereira Training with Glover Teixeira, you're going to get used to being on bottom. You're going to get used to dealing with jiu-jitsu threat as well. And also, as shown in his career, sensible logic on the ground. He doesn't give up his neck. He doesn't give up bad positions like his back. You know, he sort of stayed safe against Andreas Michailidis in his debut. Even in his debut fight in MMA, he got taken down immediately in his first ever fight and showed some submission ability, almost had an armbar, almost had an inverted triangle in the first round of that fight. But I'm looking at this fight on the feet. Let's cut to the chase here. And I know that Adesanya's got his gyno back and he's a cheater and it's pathetic and I've got my built-in excuses if he wins. I'm joking. I'm not. But either way, when I see this fight on the feet, and I'm going to get way more in-depth on this because I'm not seeing anyone else say it, I think Pereira has improved more than Adesanya in striking since their fight with each other. Massively. I'll actually go as far and say this. I know that Adesanya has had to worry about takedowns from other opponents, but I'll go as far and say this. I think Adesanya's gotten worse at striking. And I think this is a fight where they're both going to resort to looking the best they've looked on the feet. Because I don't think either of them are going to go for takedowns, and I don't think either of them are expecting takedowns from their opponent. Okay? I think they're both going to look the best they've looked on the feet for a long time. You know, we've seen Alex Pereira deal with takedowns by Bruno Silva, and that fight got a little bit sloppy as it went on. But he still won. You know what I mean? He still won the fight pretty impressively. But, you know, we see earlier fights in Adesanya's, like the Vettori first fight compared to the second one. And Vettori is nothing special. And watching Adesanya go tit for tat with these guys that aren't the glory. I can't ignore the level of kickboxing that Alex Pereira progressed to. You know? 2-weight world champion, the first one ever in glory history. And the way he did it by beating people that Adesanya had also lost to. Jason Wilness, who beat Alex Pereira before as well. People don't realize that in the first 2 fights that they had, Pereira was a noob at kickboxing. He's a noob. You know what I mean? He was genuinely a noob. Like, he went into the first fight with Adesanya after a few years training of kickboxing. He wanted to be an amateur boxer. Came over to kickboxing. He got a gifted decision. Adesanya should have won that first fight that they had. But then to win the second one, here's some conditions you don't even think about. First of all, he's still new to his kickboxing career compared to Adesanya, who had loads of experience by then and started way earlier. Pereira started, I believe, at 23 years of age. I believe he started at. But either way, in the second fight, Alex Pereira stepped in on short notice. He was injured before that fight. He was coming off of a KO loss. You know what I mean? He was coming off of a KO loss. He had an injury. He sat out for a little bit for a kickboxer, because normally they fight every month, every 2 months. He sat out for about 7 months, and he still found the ability to KO Israel Adesanya. And people talk about, you know, Adesanya was destroying him. Let's set it straight. The first round was close. Adesanya edged the first round of their rematch. The second round was very competitive, with both guys landing shots. And then at the end of the second round, Adesanya rocked him and got a standing 8 count. Like, that happens a lot in kickboxing and boxing. And then, like, people talk about it like Adesanya was toying with Pereira and literally, like, spamming random combinations that he's making up against him. No, Adesanya was strategically landing right hands, timing him with shots, rocked him in the second round. And then what happened? Pereira came back. Even at the end of the second, he held his own a bit better. Then in the third round, he held his own and he landed a big KO blow. I've just seen people like Jared Cannonier recently, and even Whittaker, and people that I consider far worse strikers than Alex Pereira, land good big shots on Israel Adesanya. And I feel like Pereira can land them. And those guys, as much as they are good, this is a real thing we have to consider. They aren't 6'4" with an 80-inch reach. And that's something that Adesanya has had over his opponents, yet still got clipped. I made a video on my second channel called If Alex Pereira Lands These Shots that Jared Cannonier landed. It's on my second channel, the MMA Guru Clips. It's moments where Jared Cannonier landed big left hands on Israel Adesanya in their fight. And if Alex Pereira lands them with the extra reach, with the extra size in general, he's a massive guy. This is going to be the first time in a long time that Israel Adesanya's fought someone larger than him. And something else I want to talk about. This is going to be the first time in a long time Adesanya has fought a kickboxing style of opponent. For Alex Pereira, he is so new to MMA and focusing on MMA. This guy had a title fight in kickboxing last year. If this is a stand-up fight, Pereira should win this fight. Straight up, he should. He had a stand-up only kickboxing title fight against Vakhitov in a rematch. He lost a majority decision, somewhat controversial, whatever. Great fighter though, great kickboxer, and it was for the belt just over a year ago, a year and 2 months ago. Then 2 months later he beats Nicolae. A few months later he beats Bruno Silva. A few months later he beats Sean Strickland, and here we are. Like, he was just kickboxing at the highest level of glory kickboxing, and Adesanya hasn't been there in so long that I think he's plateaued. And I think Pereira has massively improved since their kickboxing match. And his performances, like, Adesanya did not achieve anywhere near the same level of achievements as Alex Pereira did in kickboxing. He just didn't get to that level. Pereira did. And I feel like he's going to give Adesanya a problem. Like, Adesanya wasn't even expecting Jan Blachowicz to grapple. Which is why even in round 4, he was like doing all this drunken off-balance, like taunting Jan Blachowicz. He wouldn't have been doing that if he was confident that Jan Blachowicz wasn't going to shoot on him. You know what I mean? Like, he was real messing around with his center of balance in round 4, trying to mock. If he was so scared of a takedown, he would have been focused, making it happen. He was comfortable on the feet against Blachowicz, but again, left hook, tags him on the chin. Jab, tags him. And that's another big problem for Adesanya, the jab. And it's not something that Pereira uses much, but it's something that people who aren't the level of striker that Pereira is have used on Adesanya over and over again. Robert Whittaker, in their rematch, I'm not joking here, out-jabbed Adesanya for 5 straight rounds. Blachowicz out-jabbed him non-stop as well in the first, second, and third round. Third round you can give to Adesanya. First 2 rounds, Blachowicz left hook, ting, caught him on the chin. When Pereira throws it, it's different. It's different when Pereira throws it. And Pereira is going to be able to deal with the leg kicks like a guy like Jan Blachowicz can deal with them. He's probably the same size as Blachowicz. Look at him stand next to Dominick Reyes. Like, I think this is the time that the big dominant champion in Adesanya is going to lose. I picked him to beat Vittori. The only time I picked against him was against Paulo Costa. I don't know, maybe I have a thing for Brazilians. I spoke about this in my live chat because I picked Burns to beat Usman as well. But Paulo got drunk, whatever. Who knows what really happened. But he looked terrible. Oh well. But with Pereira, I think he's got this one in the bag. I do. Whittaker had a massive reach disadvantage. Was landing clean left hooks on Adesanya. Adesanya leaving himself open for left hooks. Was out jabbing him for 5 straight rounds. I reckon Pereira's got this one in the bag. If they have a striking match, which I really believe they will because of the ego of Adesanya and what he wants to prove in this fight, I reckon Pereira's going to catch him. Round 2, KO. Toodle pip, see you later. Goodbye.